All right, so we're starting from fleshing out your framework, your secret sauce. Mine for this course is called Nurture. The first step in the nurture process is noticing your ICP. In terms of noticing your ICP, who would you have in mind when you talk about Yawa? Why don't we start with you? The ICP for Vimeo. Whom are you targeting?
So on our side is actually marketers for like the Vimeo Enterprise tool. Our ICP
Mhm.
are marketers.
That's good. That's good. And one thing that I like to push us to do here is let's see if we can push a couple of layers below just the demographics a little bit. So, Yawa, you're targeting marketers. A lot of what I do targets marketers. Adam and Casey often are targeting marketers as well. And yet, I would guess that our ICPs are actually fairly different. So, Yawa, what type of marketers are you targeting? And really, what type of problems are they experiencing?
Yeah, what we're looking at is marketers within a specific company size, but like the problems that they are trying to resolve is like really how to come up with like more creative campaign, whether it's like a demand marketing campaign or more like awareness related. But people who have an understanding of that video will be a way for them to really push forward and cut through the noise. So it's marketers that I'll say that experiencing like a pain point where like their marketing campaign are dead in the water, I will say.
That's certainly not a fun place to live. We've all been there. And as a matter of fact, Casey, you were just talking about working with some new agencies and creators that are going to be repurposing some of your content into short form on channels that I'm guessing would include video channels, YouTube, Vimeo, and in particular is challenging because a lot of us create long form content, we put it onto YouTube and we get crickets. We get no response. It's like our mom is the only person to watch the video. And even mom is multitasking while while she's watching it. But YouTube is tough if you don't know the specific tricks of the trade to optimize your video. So yes, a lot of marketers experience that dead in the water campaign feeling. Yao, I wonder if maybe you could help us understand the psychographics a little bit more of some of these people experiencing that, and maybe the rest of us can chime in too, because we might be a little bit of your ICP, have some overlap with your
Yeah.
ICP. What does that feel like when you put up a video that doesn't get a response? And what ultimately can you do when that happens?
Yeah, so it's about putting video who doesn't get a response, but it's also about, I think the problems that we are trying to resolve is we are saying what Vimeo is saying is, so obviously we believe in the power of video to be able to connect with people, to connect with the audience. So that's really what we're focusing on and trying to identify like marketers who can understand that in a way, but really want to connect with their audience in a particular way. So one of the things like the follow back to that. And I guess that's my default. I go straight into feature. But what we're saying is you have a problem. You're trying to create like videos or create campaign overhaul. It might not just be a video campaign. It's like campaign overhauls that connect with your audience. You're trying to do
Mm,
it in a more efficient way. So without having to go in 50 different platforms as a marketer to be able to do that. So that's one.
yeah.
And then you also want to have like all the data, all the analytics in one platform to justify all the things that you have done
Mm,
as a marketer
yeah.
and
Yeah.
KPI. So that's really what we are like saying at Vimeo. And that's what we're looking at for marketers. Like you have a one-stop shop to do everything that you have to do to run like a campaign efficiently, but also to be a little bit innovative and like push the envelope a little bit. So that's really what we're looking at, a full end-to-end suite platform for marketers to use video.
That's really helpful to me, and I'd love to hear from some of the guys as well on this. I'll just say a couple of things, Yawa, that jumped out to me really quickly. There is that you did talk about features, but you actually highlighted some of the pain points. One of the pain points is, as a marketer, it's hard for me to gain, number one, gain the attention of my audience. It's getting harder to gain their attention and then to actually hold their attention, like have engagement. And so you being able to provide me all of those metrics is really helpful for me to know what's working and what's not working. That's on the prospect side or the audience side. On the other side, internally to my company, it's getting harder and harder as a marketer to justify my campaigns. There's more and more scrutiny that's saying, why are you spending time and money on that channel? Is it working? How do you know it's working? It sounds like Vimeo is trying to tackle a couple of those things. But those are some of that's my language. I'd love to hear Casey, maybe some of your language, Tuttle and Romu, for video channels. What have some of your struggles been?
Yeah, I think so. When I think about video channels, I guess there's almost like two things I'm thinking about. One is like it feels to me like when I think about YouTube versus Vimeo, I think about discovery versus owned assets. So like when I'm thinking about Vimeo, the application in my mind for Vimeo or Wish you have one of those is hey, I have a place where I like own I have access and ownership over the video content, data, all of that type of piece. The
Mm,
challenge, though, like just for transparency's sake, the challenge is that doesn't, in my head, fit a discovery piece. Meaning that if I'm trying to do more ranking for certain, say, keywords that I think are going to surface on YouTube, my intuition is to go to something like YouTube for searchability. So I think it depends, and this is all somewhat of a just like my current perception or understanding of some of these spaces. But that's, I think, like the two poles that I would think too. If I have an audience, if I have the substantial ability to drive traffic, then something like a Vimeo or something like a Wistia feels like it makes more sense in my head that I can like capture and keep those people on my assets and track it well. Whereas if I'm trying to create content with the intentionality of drawing in lots of like outside eyes from a discovery standpoint, I would think more towards a YouTube.
I would
mm.
honestly say that I have not really done much video. So I really don't have a perspective on this that I think is valuable at this point, or at least to further the discussion.
Adam, may I ask why you think that is? Is it because you're more inclined to written content, or talk about that a bit?
Yeah, no, I have a YouTube channel. I've done some videos. I think for myself, it feels daunting at times. So I want it to be quality. So the sit down, like I tend to prefer, even like when I do like presentations and things like that, I don't write out word for word what I'm going to say. I tend to give myself the high levels and then riff because I like to have a little bit more like in the moment. And so when I make videos, I tend to be a little bit more like a groove. I have done those with AC and I think like they worked out well for YouTube specifically or some of our social things like that. But
Mm.
for myself, honestly, it just feels like more of a until the last year, like I haven't really put much emphasis on creating content. I do a lot of behind the scenes work for Active Campaign, and my stuff would be more like content for like sales emails or things like that that our sales teams are utilizing. Although, again, we're starting to dive into this more. So I suspect my answer in 12 months would be actually different than it is today.
Mm.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing. That's helpful. Casey talk about control and YouTube versus which is like interesting. That's one of the I'll say like the angles that we are digging into, but we are more thinking about it like YouTube with Vimeo, meaning like YouTube being more like a distribution channel and Vimeo being the house, like when you think about it, where you house like all your content. But I like what you both said. I think, Adam, what I'm taking out from you, what you just said is like the doubting aspect of it. And I think that's definitely one of the sentiment or feelings that we really want to address as well to marketers, that video doesn't have to be daunting, like straightforward. And it is very straightforward. But thank you for the feedback on that. That's helpful.
I love that. I love that. We've talked in previous weeks, excuse me, we've talked in previous weeks about this idea of a negative ICP, being clear not only on who your ideal customer is, but whom you're not targeting. And Adam, maybe you felt, and you might be accurate, that you would be a bit of a negative ICP, even though you are a marketer, you're not doing a lot of broadcast market videos today. Maybe your video might be more in line with, what are they called? Some of those personal video websites. I don't know if it's Bong, I forget the names. There's a handful of them where salespeople are recording one-to-one videos. So that would be a very different video use case from Vimeo. Yawa is pointing out, though, that it sounds like Vimeo might be broadening their ICP to also include individuals who are not prolific video creators today, but could still benefit from video creation in their space.
I think too, like now that I'm thinking about it, I think one area where I find challenging as well for myself is probably the platform that I want to put content in a professional setting is
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn. That's where I've tried to pull
Hmm.
from Casey's genius and be more consistent with posting and trying to drive more traffic
Right.
and just be like very authentic. Like I don't like posting, check out this like 3-point case study. Yeah, I'm like, let's just post like real. And so a lot of stuff, it's sometimes my thoughts, sometimes this. I think I would probably find LinkedIn valuable to post on video with. For myself, though, again, where I find it daunting is what medium do I use to record the video and then upload it into LinkedIn to make it, like, to me, it feels like a total pain in the ass, and I don't have time to do that. So it's not even that the desire is not there. It's just that it feels, and to be like just transparent, like I've put about 5 seconds worth of effort into doing it. So it could be a me issue as well, like just acknowledging that. But I think to me, it feels like, again, in all the things that I have to focus on in my day, because like where Casey works for marketing in ActiveCampaign, part of his job, Casey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is to generate content. I am in rev ops, sales ops, more behind the scenes within sales. And so while I do try to drive traffic, my job description is much more focused on the internal processes that we have and the integrations with like things like ChatGPT and stuff like that.
Yes, yes. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And what we've just modeled here, folks, is this concept of not just noticing your ICP and getting a little bit more specific about it. This was a very nice brief exercise in doing that for Yawa's brand with Vimeo, but also now getting into this concept of understanding their pain. And I think we all have slightly different pain points. Casey talked about the importance of discoverability on channels like YouTube. Tuttle's talked about the value of creating video, but then using it on his preferred channel, LinkedIn. Yawa even outlined a different use case for Vimeo that we hadn't really thought of, like Vimeo working with YouTube. You might still take advantage of the discoverability of LinkedIn, but house your videos on Vimeo and maybe on your owned asset properties. Now use Vimeo to serve up those assets. So really interesting ways, but this is such an important piece of the puzzle. Like delving into the pain points, the language that your ICP is using to talk about their pain. Like Adam shared some language right now that I couldn't have phrased it the way he did. Adam, I would almost say, like you talked about only putting minutes of work into researching what tool to record with and so on, and maybe it's a you problem. I would say that's where marketers get excited, because I wouldn't say that's a you problem. I'd say that's an opportunity for a vendor to say, no, Adam, I don't need you to put 100 hours into figuring this thing out. I want to make it easy for you. So I'm going to solve that problem for it because you're a busy guy. You got RevOps issues to focus on.
Yeah.
So I just want to get some thoughts and some reaction to that. Romu, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well as we talk about this idea of obsessing about the ICP's pain points.
Yeah, to me, just to go back to a little bit of what I said the last session I was in, is getting those insights in the first place was a lot of work at first.
Yeah.
Sometimes you work in companies, and honestly, a lot of people don't really want you to talk to customers, because sometimes the easiest way to keep your customers is to not talk to them at all, which sounds a bit intuitive, but that's what it is. So it's been a lot of my work through my full-time job to just get there, and we're finding in a good place. And it's incredible how much changing a little bit even of your copy or your messaging can do. So again, like for Perfect Serve, we're basically selling healthcare communication and scheduling solutions. So we talk to a lot of different people, but overall it's just doctors, medical staff, all that great stuff. And there's a term that we use a lot, which is medical providers. So just referring to them as providers overall. Yeah. I found out that they hate that term.
Wow.
They would rather be called clinicians than providers. And sometimes even changing some of our marketing copy and making sure that we talk the way they talk is already a great first step to not coming across as too salesy or too marketing-y and, oh, those people actually know what I'm going through. And same thing with some of those pain points. For example, there's a new solution that we're trying to push right now, which is our audience is basically healthcare call centers and transfer centers. And then we've learned that there's an overarching team or word that's contact centers. That's really how they refer themselves. And the huge thing for us was to say, hey, you're using on-premise solutions like hardware, and we're a cloud-based solution. Yeah, it's still a thing. It's still a selling point in 2024 for some industries. We're in the cloud.
Wow.
But really the main thing when we started talking to those people is that IT cares about that. Nobody else does. They care about training staff, recruiting staff, retaining staff. That's the big struggle now since COVID. People want to work from home. They're having a hard time recruiting. That's actually the true value of cloud is virtual, to do a virtual contact center. So we're just starting tweaking our wording a little bit now that we to customers and actually understand their real pains a little better.
Yeah, that is fascinating, Romu. Some of the terms that you're using, the customers actually don't like being called that. That's crazy. And this idea of not being allowed to talk to customers directly is quietly a big problem for marketers. I'd love to hear, considering your organization is very different from Casey's and Adam's, I'd love to hear how an active campaign, Casey, for example, how you're able to talk to customers and get direct insights from them on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's a good question. Adam probably has actually even more experience on this than I do, but we ran last major way that I connected with customers is I ran a voice of the customer campaign on LinkedIn. So when I was starting, I wanted to make sure that our customers' voices, besides our own employees, were being activated. So we got 140 people to post about Active Campaign and like why they migrated to us, different use cases, what they were liking over about a 2-month period. And it was just like a matter of initially we started with our highest NPS. So basically like people who were strong advocates of the platform, we started there. And then after we went through there, we just shot an email out, and I just was like earnest and authentic with them and said, hey, I'm starting here. And I feel like a lot of Active Campaign's communications are just from me or from like Active Campaign. And I would love for you guys to share your voices there. And we got about maybe a dozen or so, maybe 20 people who were like, yeah, we'll share our stories. And then I just started to think through like reciprocity and how we could help support people. So we would ask them like, hey, if you guys are able to share your story, we'd love to send our team over to your podcast or your show or your insert asset and support you as well. And that was a great way for us to get more and more folks, as a lot of people, Active Campaign's a fairly large organization, so they wanted to be kind of part of that orbit. And so we kept refining. And I think ultimately what worked the best of all the iterations was to go for a very specific ask. So meaning like before we were like, share anything about Active Campaign. And it was also somewhat open-ended on the time. Where we landed with the most results is we asked them like, this Friday, if you could share, for instance, why you chose to migrate over to Active Campaign. So the time was a specific ask, and it was a very specific ask in terms of what. So they weren't having to think about what exactly am I supposed to talk about. So we controlled for both those variables. And we also systematized on our end the reciprocity piece. So we made sure that we had a strong motion to subscribe to their YouTube channel or comment and engage on a video or whatever kind of we were doing in return. So when we had those 3 variables dialed, we were able to get a ton of customer buy-in. So that's one very specific application of fostering like customer engagement. I think, again, we do that in a lot of different ways. And so that's one example though.
No, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. Tuttle, have you had different experiences on your end of the brand?
Yeah, I think when I was in sales, the best way was just to ask directly. And obviously I was a little more engaged. I always tried to stay engaged with customers even after the sales. I thought there was a lot of value in that. And so there's still customers. I haven't actively sold Active Campaign since 2016, but there's still customers that I sold to that I stay in touch with. And so I think like building that brand of being available, being helpful, etc. Even like today, just an example of that is there's a guy that I sold in 2015 on a multi-year contract, which was before we ever did anything like that. And we had a sales team of 2 at that point. But every 2 years, he'll still reach out to me and ask to renew the contract and things like that. And so I always help him. Like I just make sure that I don't send him off to somebody else. I don't hand him off to customer success. I just help him get the order set up, do whatever he needs, work on pricing, whatever it is. So I think like being human is important. I think that one of the areas that I've been chewing on lately that I think we could improve upon, that I don't think that we've done very well at. So I think highlighting the lessons learned is from a sales perspective. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to follow up with customers coming from a manager or a leader or something like that and saying, hey, it's been a month since you purchased. I know that you worked with XYZ rep. How was your experience? How could we have better served your need? And offer that time to connect with him on a call or something like that if they'd want, or to fill out a survey. I think that there's a lot of information that could be collected by going through that. Now, you might not have a ton of people do it, but if even 10% of people fill it out or something like that, you could incentivize them with a gift card or whatever it might be. I think there's a lot of opportunity that the sales org specifically probably misses out on to, like, we have our voice of the customer reporting, we have other ways that we're gathering information. I think there's a lot of information lost though, because salespeople, generally speaking, have the longest conversations with people. They have the most conversations. I think there's ways to also, I think Casey and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago in our, just personally, but like to probably start pulling like our gong calls out, having Chat GPT or something analyze them and looking for trends and things like that to therefore serve the customer in a better way. So it's things like, hey, we know that when we work with agencies, they tend to have these pain points. Here's how we solve those pain points. Not so saying we can solve it, but listen, here's like the actual solutions to solving. I think there's a lot of opportunity there that today we're not capitalizing on. So that's something that our VP of sales and I have been chatting about, because I think we're missing the ball on it, to be honest with you.
That's a fantastic use case, Tuttle, not just because that asset or that information is readily available at most companies, recorded sales calls, but also we can now add that additional layer of AI, Chat GPT, because the past couple of companies I've worked for, in my first 30 days, I was manually going through sales calls. You typically a list of the better calls. Oh, you got to listen to these calls, and taking notes, trying to step back, analyze, aggregate patterns and trends. It's not necessarily easy to do in a short amount of time. But if you could systematize that by using ChatGPT, and I've heard of people doing this already, that's something that a lot of us could roll out at our brands. Romu, that might be also a way to sidestep this challenge of the company not wanting to give marketing direct access to customers.
Yeah, it's funny you guys are saying that because we did something similar actually like
Nope.
a few months ago. So we don't have Gong, we have Chorus now, but so Chorus is great at something looking for keywords and it can kind of surface insights. But before that, we actually took basically almost 3 years worth of data in Salesforce and everything closed lost and everything closed won. And we're still working on getting better Salesforce notes as an organization, which I think is, it's pretty universal. I don't think it's specific to us, but we actually exported all that and put it in ChatGPT and came up with like top 5 reasons why opportunity would walk and top 5 reasons why they sign with us. And it was a bit different because again, we have more what we call group, smaller independent private medical practices, and then enterprise, which is like bigger hospitals. And the reasons really differ. But I feel like until we got those insights, we're approaching the audiences in a similar way, in a kind of, but by doing that, we really understood the difference in intent, basically. Like the smaller medical practices, by the time they're ready to talk to us, it's very transactional. It's, hey, what's the price? I need something yesterday.
Okay.
Because what I have is not working for me. Okay. Where enterprise is, I'm an influencer. I kind of like your content. It sounds interesting. I'm not really the person making the decision. And by the way, if we get there, it's going to take 12 people in a room and it's probably going to take 12 to 18 months. So obviously you have to do a whole lot more nurturing and education and all of that. But for the smaller medical practices, we were super heavy on education and nurturing, and it's going to take time. And really realize our TAM is large enough that we can go after the people that are ready to buy today and make money now thing. So it was very insightful in that way.
That's rich. That is rich. So you might need to talk to Romu about how they pull that off. He might be able to help you guys maybe roll it out.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. Like Excel export, throw it in ChatGPT, having a decent prompt or correcting it a little bit. But yeah, that was cool.
No, I'm really excited to actually hear these examples because again, marketers really do struggle with this challenge of I don't have direct access to the customer. Even when we have access to prospects, it's often a one-to-many and it's unidirectional. It's sending out broadcast emails. So being able to be in the same room, whether it's virtual or listening on these sales calls, is really quite helpful. All right, so this is good. As far as nurture sequences, Romu, you pointed out that if you look at the 2 different segments that you target, one of them The smaller ones, the smaller segment, they're more transactional. They're typically coming to you already in a buying cycle. The larger ones, they've got a much larger buying group, and it's a 12 to 18 month sales cycle. So there might be more of an opportunity for email nurture sequences to really add value for those longer sales cycles. The challenge is, what do you have to say to them over a 12-month period that's going to hold their attention? What we want to do is we want to tease out those findings, whether it's from ChatGPT or from your manual Excel analysis, and then pick one, ideally one of their most urgent problems, and see how we can actually do this next step, which is reverse engineering a solution. And the idea here, I'd love to hear, by the way, how this might apply to some of the ICP groups for ActiveCampaign. But Romu, with your scenario first, we want to look for opportunities where we can deliver some results in advance. So again, maybe these folks aren't going to be ready to buy for 12 months. We want to find out what are some of those pain points, frustrations they're dealing with right now, and how can we actually give them advice, free consulting, maybe even access to free tools that will give them a small win and build trust so that when they get ready for the big purchase, we're actually top of mind for them. So I'd love to hear some thoughts around this idea of what are some areas where we can look to give our prospects small wins without necessarily giving the farm away to the point where they don't need our product. Have you guys thought about that before?
Yeah. So again, for me on the enterprise side, it goes back to, again, what I mentioned last time about content. So because there's a longer sales cycle, because there are more people in really a buying committee involved, it's a bit cliche, but it's really about thought leadership. It's definitely way less about trying to sell a solution or replacement for what they currently have. And it's much more about helping them with change management, basically. The resistance is coming from within, as in, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the investment is obviously financial, but it's also equally about time and resources, especially for hospitals right now. Budgets are tight, but resources are tight. And there are major players that do similar stuff that we do in a more traditional way. And it's just working. It's not great, but it's working. So it's a lot of education. It's about trying to leverage our internal thought leaders to give them strategies and best practices around what healthcare communication should be nowadays, and how patient expectations are changing and how even staff expectations are changing. There's a big topic in healthcare, which is burnout. Like a lot of nurses quitting and a lot of staff just quitting. It's a lot. It's finding ways to educate them in that way without being the authority. We're not healthcare workers. We don't know what they're going through. So the positioning now is much more about being a partner. And also, we've realized that when we have successful relationship with customers, they stick around for our knowledge more than for the software itself. So it's really like hand-holding them about, again, how do we go through change like this? So we're trying to find ways to do that from a marketing standpoint. It's, again, not always easy, but on paper, that's what we're trying to do.
That totally makes sense. Yeah, one other just thing I would maybe add based on the initial question that you said, like giving something small away, but don't give away the house. I would actually encourage folks to give away as much as humanly possible. I think this is actually one of the biggest mistakes that marketers make. I think there's this old philosophy around like gated content where there's this mindset of give them this little taste and then bring them through. But the reality is this: everything is incredibly saturated now. Email is saturated, video is saturated, social is saturated. If you go and you look at B2B folks who are driving large revenue impacts from places like LinkedIn, I want you to look at Adam Robinson, Rand Fishkin, Chris Walker. Look at what they do on their profiles. They give it all away. They share their financials. They're sharing, like, they're just super, super transparent. And all the profiles I see, like Adam Robinson is literally like sharing his revenue graphs in public. And if you listen to the podcasts, he's built a 20 million business and he just got to his first million with his new one. And he's sharing everything public and it's all trust-based. He's not even talking about the product. He's sharing all of his journey. And through that is building trust that then translates. So I think it can look a little different, like it can look slightly different ways depending on where you're at. But I would strongly encourage folks that, like, I would say this, the thing that you're trying to win is trust with your target market. That's it. Trust with your target market. And the fastest way that you're going to build trust is to be really transparent. I just have so much conviction in that from everything I've seen and my own kind of lived experience, that I would say that if you're wondering, hey, should I give away half of this case study and then tease the rest of the case study and or whatever else, wherever possible, give people more information than anyone else is giving. And that will build the trust for them to say, wow, if this is what is upfront, if this is what's being given freely, like, I have to reach out. I have to connect with this person. I have to figure out what else, because that is what's going to stand out from the noise. So I would just add that as my personal vantage point on that core question.
Yeah, it's at my own scale, Casey, it's also have something that comes to mind that's interesting. The whole gated versus ungated philosophy or debate or whatever. Historically, because of, I would say, more like past management style, we've gated everything.
Sure.
Because how do we measure it otherwise, or how do we attribute it otherwise? And I think we're finally at a point where we're like freeing ourselves a little bit from these metrics, especially actually when it comes to email marketing. For the longest time, we would have a list of people and the call to action would be to read the report, and we already have their email address because we're emailing them, and they have to fill a form to access the report that we emailed them because we want to track the impact of it. In my head, I'm like, this is silly. We're literally already have their email information. Why would we ask them again? If we don't ask them, some of those clicks might be bogus. There might be anti-spam bots that automatically open the email before the real person looks at it, which is true. But again, I feel like from a marketing standpoint, at least my philosophy has been to like free ourselves a little bit from tracking every single little interaction and really sticking to like the critical KPIs, hoping that long term it will pay out because they do see more information without having to constantly give out another piece of information or that extra friction. So right now it's very basic. We just look at open rates and click-through rates. And yes, some of it might be a bit inflated, but directionally, does it work better? Do we get more clicks if everything is ungated and available freely? And so far it's worked for us. At least we think it is. It's hard to attribute at times.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like attribution can be tricky, but if you look at like state of the industry reports, like Shopify and many others is a perfect example. What used to happen is they would just give you part of it and then you would opt in for the full report. Now what they do is they'll give you the full state of, but there is actually still an opt-in. The opt-in is to get more of this type of thing, right? So I think there's a big opportunity there where it's like you actually give them the full thing, but they still can opt in, and they can opt in to get more issues or to get more whatever. But instead of doing like a clipped case study, it's like the full case study with the opt-in to consume more. I personally like the synergy of those models because you give them full value upfront without requiring the opt-in. If that's all they want, awesome. But if they want to engage more, they can do that as well. So that can be a way that folks can maybe get a little bit of best of both worlds.
Yeah, I like the direction of this conversation a lot, guys. And I think, Casey, something you emphasize, the fact that marketers and brands really ought to focus on building trust as one of their priorities is key. And this isn't a religious belief. This is because of the reality that a lot of these channels are way more saturated than they were 20 years ago. So some of these other more practical tactics, they did work. The gated content and the lead magnet, that stuff did work 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, but now the efficacy has just gone down to the point where we really do need a different approach. Romu, some of the things you pointed out about your audience's struggles, the fact that a lot of clinicians are experiencing burnout, that expectations from the staff and from patients are changing, is really resonant for me. I come from a family of medical practitioners, mom, dad. My big sister is a doctor. My big sister actually, she's not 50 yet. She's been thinking about retiring for the past several years. Why? Because of burnout. And so she got to the point where she scaled back to 4 days a week. And then she scaled back to 3 days a week, really it's a 4-day week, but one of those days is an administrative week. So she's going into the clinic 3 days a week. The fourth day, she's at home doing paperwork. And then she has Fridays off for a 3-day weekend. Now, all of a sudden, she's not talking about retiring anymore because she actually feels refreshed. She is enjoying the work again. And she's thinking, maybe I could go another 5 years. Stories like that have absolutely nothing to do with, maybe not nothing, but little to do with the product that you're selling, Romu, but to the point where you could actually, your brand could highlight some of those problems like burnout or changing patient expectations, and maybe even bring in some of these clinicians to talk about modern ways of tackling these problems. I don't know if clinicians need to do more yoga or take up what's that new game that they're playing? It's not tennis, it's like mini
Pickleball.
tennis. Thank you. Pickleball.
Pickleball. Yeah.
Like those are actually solutions to burnout that have nothing to do with your product, but you're giving away a lot of value and you're building that trust. So just want to get
Yeah.
the response to the pickleball. I want credit if your company uses that, by the way, but no, I'm just kidding.
The thing for us is it still relates to our value proposition in a way. It's just a lot of the things that's related to burnout is the admin burden, really. It's just clinicians and staff spending a lot of time on administrative tasks. That's not what they signed up for. They're not interested in that. They want to take care of patients. They want to use their medical license to the best way possible. Schedules take time to put together, especially if you have 50 physicians and everybody has their personal preferences. Managing call when you get a call at 3 a.m. when it was your off day and it was just because they need a prescription refill, that's gonna impact you mentally. So it's really that. Our main thing is to say the best thing that we can do for you is to set up the solution and make sure it gets out of the way. That's really it.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And we're coming up on time, so we'll touch on a couple more pieces of this whole framework here. But this kind of discussion I always find very enlightening because some of this stuff is not necessarily intuitive until we start really talking about it and obsessing about the problems. Again, ActiveCampaign is doing this really well, providing value with first-party data and case studies, and then just giving it all away for free, or giving guidance around sender score and deliverability to people who maybe aren't even their customers. All of this stuff is building trust. So I think one best practice as we think about what kind of nurture sequences do we want to create is to actually identify, to separate out these frustrations that our ICP are experiencing. Take one of those frustrations, like burnout as one example. Or I remember on a previous session, you talked about this idea of the surge, how maybe on vacation weekends, these clinics will get a surge of patients and it just wreaks chaos. Really narrowing down on one single problem and then unpacking a step-by-step, paint by numbers way to get from A to B, to get from the problem to solution, again, without selling the product. By so doing, each of our nurture sequences now almost becomes like a mini email course. It's like a 5 steps to quitting smoking or whatever it is. You're giving something simple, but it works. And what we're doing is we are giving them results in advance. We're giving them a small win, and we are building trust. So one of the things that I'm going to challenge everyone, because this is end of a quarter for a lot of you guys, yourself included, Romu, we'll maybe push this to next week, but some of the homework is going to be, can we select one individual frustration of our ICP and then think through 5 simple steps to take them from frustration to peace of mind without ever recommending our product? What do you think?
That's a good one right there. Yeah, it's a tricky exercise in a way, but that's definitely something that I'm paying attention to because I feel like even when we do quote unquote thought leadership, we naturally trying to insert a product a bit more too aggressively in there sometimes. So even a light mention or a suggestion might make sense at times where it's more like, hey, this is how you do it. And by the way, there are tools out there that can help you with that. If either you want to do it in a more automated way or if you want it to take less time, that kind of stuff. But yeah, that that caveat of not mentioning the product at all is definitely a great exercise for sure.
And I think you actually threaded the needle really well there. Sometimes mentioning the product is not necessarily a problem if there's trust established. If you've already given some value and then you mention the product without being salesy. So I really think the intent ultimately is what makes the difference. It's not necessarily a taboo to mention the product. We recognize that we're all in a commerce business. We're here to generate income. It's just, I don't want to have your hand in my pocket until I'm ready to pull my wallet out and say, you know what, you're the one I want to give that money to.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
it should be fun.
For me, even as a reader, that's the thing that's tricky is, let's say, 5 steps to do this, and step 1
Yes.
through 4 are all valid, and then step 5 is literally buy your product. You made everything else invalid again. I'm like, how can I trust 1 through 4 when you're like
That's
pushing
true.
your product as one solution so aggressively? So it's a fine line for sure.
I love that. Yeah, one through 5 has to solve the problem completely. But you gave a great example. Maybe 1 through 5 solves the problem manually. Now, if you ever want to do it in a more automated way, we have a solution that could help with that. But you could do 1 through 5 and get across the river. These are all the stepping stones to get you across the river 100% effectively. Maybe it's just not the most efficient way.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention too that I feel like, yeah, one of the things I do a lot is I mention ActiveCampaign in the context of an example where ActiveCampaign is not the focal point. The application is the focal point, right? So if I'm like, here's how I track podcasts, and I'll talk about all the different, like in my CRM, all the different tiers of like how they're organized, how I have task follow, like the whole thing is focused on a process that I do, which is to help you better organize guesting on podcasts. That's the focus of the post. ActiveCampaign is just naturally incorporated in as, oh, by the way, that just happens to be like the image on your screen that you're looking at, what it's organized in. But keeping the focal point away from that and on the application has gotten a lot more success. And I shared my breakdown, which is like how often I do topical content, things that mention the product, and then things that are just in a larger context, like growth insights, as an example. I don't necessarily think that's like a perfect formula for everyone, but I think that can be like one way to approach it is like you were saying like, hey, once every 7 posts, as an example, I might have something that has a little bit more of a product focused, but because you're building a lot of topical authority and a lot of trust through the other types of content, that kind of connects and feels a little bit more authentic. At least for me, I found that my like more AC centric content is amplified substantially by having that.
Beautiful. We're going to have to leave it there, guys. This was really helpful. Glad you guys could join. Romu, thank you for being transparent with what you're working on and your brand right there. Tuttle and Casey, as always, great insights. Appreciate you joining.
Thank you
Absolutely.
guys.
Awesome. Cheers, everyone.
You have a
Take
good
care,
one.
guys. Bye.